So piping, which I've done before, but I didn't realize that I actually didn't make a good video of it, because like the first time I did it, I didn't film it properly, and then the next few times I did it, I just assumed that I did, and I just brushed it over like, oh, piping. So because of this one comment, I am going to do a video about piping. The easiest way to do piping is to just get yourself bias binding, and this is pre-made bias binding, and if you really want to do it in a specific fabric or a specific color that you can't find piping this bias binding for, then you go and cut your fabric into a diagonal, and that will be your piping. Let's start with how I usually... Okay, let's start with the table. So this is the bias binding. What you need for the piping to have a little 3D feel, like there's a pipe in between. Usually I use yarn, but I think they have special cording or whatever for it, but yarn can be thrown into the washing machine, so I guess this is fine. Yeah, I have yarn. So what you do is that you put it in the middle of the fabric, and then I like to pin it down first. Yeah, so you pin it down first, and then you sew a very loose stitch, like just to hold it there, kind of. This, at the end of the day, wouldn't hold any structure anyway, it's just to hold it there for now. So I do a running back stitch, which is... I'll do a back stitch first. One back stitch, just to keep it, the thread there. And then I'll do a bunch of running stitches. And then using bias binding, there's this crease that's already pre-made for you, so I sewed there. Yeah, I'm gonna use this for some project, but then I cannot cut the yarn. Okay, so the other method of making piping is with a specific fabric that you want to make piping out of. Cut your fabric into a diagonal, and I'll cut a strip from the diagonal of the fabric in this ruler thickness. So just for demonstration purposes, usually you cut more than one strip because you need more than one strip for a whole garment. So I'm just gonna pretend that this is more than one strip by cutting it into more than one strip. So yeah, so more usually the case when you make your own piping, you have to piece them up by yourself. So the way to piece them up, so a lot of people say do an L, and that's confusing for me. The way I understand it is you put it the way you want it first, and this seam and this seam supposed to touch, so you align them but put them right sides together, and that forms the L that you need. So you know the L is not the other way around. Yeah, okay, and then you sew this up. You know, a lot of the things I do, you can use a machine, but it's just you can also use hand. Yeah, and then when you open this up, you get a continuous piping. And you can piece as many pieces as you want. Ta-da! Okay, continue doing the same thing I fold it in half and put in the yarn in between. That's how you make piping. So easy. Just the same steps as before. Let's just use a color I'll never use in any other cases. So here, same as the yellow one, you just loosely sew the two ends together. Not really have to feel the cord and sew right up to the edge, because sometimes if you sew right up to the edge, this bright color thread will be seen at the front. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. Just for demonstration. So I do not know what this is, but it's a scrap fabric. This is a pretty nice fabric. So if, let's say I want to pipe this curved edge, that's why I use bias binding, because it can curve very well. So I'll say I want it along this curved edge, so I'll clip it onto the curved edge. So at this point, my seam allowance would be more than this dotted line. I guess you have to prep for that. Oh, it's 1 cm. Very good. 1 cm, so okay. Okay, seam allowance. So to be honest, I think piping looks best if there's a lining. So this is another scrap fabric from something else. So I'll align the scrap fabric on. Now this time, when you sew, you have to feel with your finger like where the cord, where this cord ends, and that is where you sew. Like right there. Then you just have to feel along it. Just sew towards the edge of it. Then you'll see that you're actually sewing like way further than the initial basting stitches. So the basting stitches won't be seen. Yeah. Then just use your finger and feel all along it and sew all along it. This time I'll do a back stitch because that's a sturdier stitch and a more stable stitch. So you can imagine when this is ironed out, your piping's at the edge. So cute, right? Yeah. Okay, there's another scenario which when I piped my vest, it's an armhole, so I piped it first, and then so you can imagine that this is my vest, and then I have to pipe it. So I pipe, and then I have lining fabric. So at that time, what I did is that I pipe first. You turn it around, and then you have a lining fabric that you have to attach to where you've piped. So you fold the seam allowance to the lining, and then you just gently whip stitch onto the piping. It finished at both ends. So you don't get any visible lines at the front. all your stitches will be at the seam allowance. So you can see the difference. One is clean on both sides and the back side, and one you have little tiny whip stitches at the back side. In different scenarios you'll do differently, but at the front they should all look like this. Just nice piping. Piping is a really small detail. the yarn through. So you need... I'm such a mess.